Hey guys, today I want to continue my conversation with Thaddeus Williams and talk about this chart he made up. It's called the Scandalous Seven. And it says, meet the men who inspired the gender ideology being taught to today's children. So we're going to go through these seven men and how they contributed to what's going on in the world today. So I'm excited to get into that conversation with him. So enjoy the show. Okay, so let's talk about this chart you created, which I don't know where I discovered this, but it was fascinating, and I know a lot of these characters, but you call it the Scandalous Seven, and you say at the top of the chart it says, meet the men who inspired the gender ideology being taught to today's children. So let's talk about first Alfred Kinsey. What were his doctrines, and then what are the facts?
Sure. So Kinsey was doing most of his work in the first half of the 20th century. He died in the late 1950s. His two volumes, The Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, that dropped, I think, in 1948, and then it was followed by Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, which dropped a couple years later, 1953. This was the Bible of the sexual revolution. It's hard to overstate just how influential Kinsey's Sexual Behavior two volumes were in shaping the sexual revolutionaries of the 1960s. And some of his key doctrines, he argues that sexuality is fluid. He was one of the first to argue that gender is non-binary. He invented the Kinsey scale of gender fluidity. And most of his research has since been debunked.
Yeah.
It's no longer looked at as science. It was pseudoscience from the outset, but that didn't keep it from having the massive cultural impact that it did. He based his research, his theories, on interviews with over 1,000 sex offenders and pedophiles. And he personally loathed, he hated the Judeo-Christian concept of monogamous heterosexuality. He thought that was inherently oppressive. So that's sort of the headlines of Kinsey. A few unsavory facts about him. And this is all well documented in the infographic that Becket, I'm sure you'll make available. I have all the receipts to show backing this. But Kinsey himself sexually abused minors during his research and for his research. And this stuff is just hard to talk about, but we need to expose the evil origins of gender ideology. This included, quote, multiple orgasms in prepubescent males. That's a quote from his own book where he researched that. He falsified research. He advocated bestiality, incest. He was a pedophile rights activist, and he was a big fan of sadomasochism. And so the fact that, I'm a parent, if my kids are learning sex ed, and a lot of the dogmas being taught come from somebody like this, that is a huge red flag.
Yeah, I would say so. Okay, so let's move to Wilhelm Reich. Who is he? What were his doctrines, and what were some of the facts about his life?
Yeah, so his major work, he was also working in the first half and into the middle of the 20th century. What really put him on the map was his book, The Function of the Orgasm. He's considered to be a crackpot pseudoscientist by virtually everyone today. He was the one who coined the term sexual revolution there in the 50s. He promoted the ideology, if it feels good, do it, which is basically the sexual ethic of our generation. Sexual expressivism was how you achieve liberation from repression. So this is very much in the water we swim in the air we breathe, this idea that if you have a sexual desire and you do not gratify that desire, you are repressing it, and that's going to manifest in all kinds of negative outcomes and mental health.
It sounds like Freud too. Yeah.
Oh, very much so. So you need sexual liberation is achieved by acting out all of your sexual desires. So Wilhelm Reich is a major forefather of that view. Just like Kinsey, he thought monogamous heterosexual sex was an evil relic of religion that just needed to be abolished. So like Kinsey, there's some unsavory facts about Reich that I think are relevant to the conversation. And again, all this stuff is well documented. He battled recurring psychosis. He practiced vegetotherapy, using produce in the bedroom, and ways that could liberate one from repressed sexual desires. And he did that as part of his research on his study subjects. Much of his research would include massaging naked patients. In those massages, it's what we would know today as sexual assault, without any question. And that included children. So he sexually assaulted children as part of his research. He had multiple affairs. He, like Kinsey, was an avid defender of pedophilia. He ended up dying in prison. He landed himself in prison for a long litany of crimes. So again, as a dad, I want the Wilhelm Reichs of history not within a million-mile radius of what my kids are learning about sexuality.
And especially our next character, Michel Foucault. Talk about him.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate Foucault's impact on how people think about sexuality in our day. Foucault, he wrote History of Sexuality in the 1970s. That was a massive bestseller. He's considered the godfather of what today we know as queer theory. This idea that crops up on college and university campuses, the idea that heteronormativity is oppressive. He coined that term, heteronormativity, for those of you who might not be familiar. It would be like a protest on a university campus because Valentine's Day is rolling around, and maybe the ads for Valentine shows a male and a female with a heart. That's just pushing an oppressive heteronormative, the idea that men liking women and women liking men is the norm. That's oppressive. That's alienating folks, in the LGBTQ plus categories. So that idea that heteronormativity is a power structure and that we need to deconstruct that power structure, that's Foucault. Well, how do you deconstruct that power structure? For Foucault, sexual expression was an act of liberation. You sort of sock a blow to the man. You help deconstruct heteronormativity by taking on a subversive sexual identity and indulging in not mainstream sexual behaviors. That's how you join the revolution, is by living what others would see as a deviant sexual lifestyle.
Yeah.
And he practiced what he preached on that front. He practiced sadomasochism, sex and sadomasochistic sex. He was really into torture and bondage and S&M and things like that. He, just like Wilhelm Reich, just like Alfred Kinsey, was a huge pedophile rights activist. And we have to ask the question, if this sexual liberation is so liberating, how did that pan out for the forefathers of liberation? Well, Foucault was deeply suicidal throughout his entire adult life. He ended up, by practicing what he preached, sadly, he contracted HIV and AIDS. He was one of the first public figures to die of it in 1984. So if you break reality, the structure of moral reality has a way of breaking back. And Foucault is a tragic case in point of that.
Yes. Okay, so then Harry Benjamin.
Yeah, Benjamin also doing a lot of his work really in the mid 20th century up into the 1980s. He coined the term transsexual. He wrote a book called The Transsexual Phenomena in 1966. So the dogma, let me just quote Harry Benjamin directly here. He says, the mind of the transsexual cannot be adjusted to the body. We must adjust the body to the mind. So this made him the forefather of today's gender ideology, the forefather of gender reassignment surgery and hormone treatments for children and things like that. Harry Benjamin really is the father of that. And so think of it historically. The idea was humans have emotions, we have feelings, and those feelings could be in sync with reality. Maybe they're totally out of whack with reality. And so in most cultures through history, whether we're talking about the Buddhist pursuit of the Tao or the Way, whether we're talking about the Muslim desire to keep the 5 pillars, the Buddhist pursuit of the Eightfold Path, the Christian pursuit of discipleship and sanctification, Plato's pursuit of the good, Aristotle's pursuit of virtue, Augustine's pursuit of the ordo amoris, ordered affections and loves. Virtually every society in history has this concept that my feelings are not the final authority. So I need to engage in this quest to align my subjectivity with reality and with moral reality. Mm-hmm. But with Harry Benjamin, he sort of dumps on that entire rich human tradition and says, no. You don't conform your emotions to reality. You conform the outside world to your emotion. Your emotion is unassailable. It's unquestionable. It's sacrosanct. It's the final word. And that's now the air we breathe. I mean,
he's the father of TikTok.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that my feelings are the final say. If I feel like I'm trapped in the wrong body, then it's unthinkable that I would change my feelings to match my biology. It has to be the other way. I have to tweak the outside world and my biology to match my subjectivity. So that's Benjamin, some of his core doctrines. Well, what kind of character was he? He experimented on children's bodies, causing irreparable damage to many young children. He was undeterred when his research assistant revealed, quote, "There's too much unhappiness among people who have had the surgery. Too many end in suicide." And so Harry Benjamin, being the pioneer in terms of actually changing bodies to match people's subjective states, it was a mess. It was a travesty. It was not the raving success that it's cracked up to be, and it still isn't, by the way.
Yeah.
There's no research that reassignment surgery, that hormone treatments have any lasting positive effects on people with gender dysphoria's mental state. That what the research shows is in the early stages of hormone therapy, there's a testosterone rush for somebody who's transitioning from female to male. There is a real rush from having high T, having testosterone pumping through your veins. But once you sort of come down off that mountaintop, once you follow people who've had either hormone therapy or reassignment surgery, if you follow them after a few years, any benefit vanishes, and the rates of suicidality and mental illness, sadly, end up right where they were before. So this has been a case of false advertising, falsely advertising the benefits of transition since its inception with Harry Benjamin.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move to John Money. What's his deal?
Yeah, Money is one of the most scandalous characters on the list here. John Money, he just passed away in the early 2000s. His 1980s book, I think it was 1988, Gay, Straight, and In Between. He was the one who coined the term gender identity. That term is just ubiquitous now. It's part of the popular lexicon. What is your gender identity? He coined that term in 1967. He believed, like most of Gen Z now, it baffles me, Becket, how these ideas of people whose science has been roundly debunked are now what like a 12-year-old just thinks about gender. That blows my mind. He believed that gender was just a social construct, a purely subjective phenomena. He promoted and practiced hormone treatments and gender reassignment surgery for children. So stuff that has since gone mainstream. And let's make no mistake about this. Gender reassignment surgery, what's being sort of euphemized as just gender affirming care, right? That sounds good. Gender affirming care. It is big business. There's a huge financial incentive to invest in, I'm not going to mince words here, mutilating children's bodies. There's billions of dollars to be made in that industry. And so follow the money, and a lot of that goes back to John Money. He, I think, should have his card permanently pulled as having insight on human sexuality based on just a travesty of a case where he found 6-year-old twins that one, it's a long story. You can read all the details online, but I'll just sort of cut to the point here. He wanted to prove the hypothesis that your gender is purely social. And so one of the twins was to be raised, as a female. The other was to be raised as a male, and purely on the social factors, he was going to substantiate his gender theory. Needless to say, the facts completely debunked the idea that gender is a pure social construct. But what's more disturbing is, as he was doing his research with these twins, starting when they were 6 years old, or I should say it started before that, but when they were 6, he would have them strip down naked and simulate sexual acts with each other. He would show 6-year-olds pornography. He personally assaulted both of them sexually, and both later in life ended up committing suicide.
Wow.
So we're talking with John Money. He is a monster. He is a pedophile monster, and yet he is the one that people look to form their view of human sexuality and gender. He falsified his research. He was an adamant pedophilia defender. And so by the time this stuff is making it now into our curriculum for children, think of most kids in America now are being exposed to what's called the genderbread person. The genderbread person. It's this little graphic of a genderbread person, has a little arrow to the genitals saying this is your biological sex. And then it has a little arrow to the heart. This is your gender identity, the way you feel. Then it has a little arrow to the body. This is how you choose to present. All these categories that your biology has nothing to do with your gender, that is being inculcated in children's minds. John Money is the father of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to JeanPaul Sartre. JeanPaul Sartre.
Sartre, yes. Sartre, Existentialism and Human Emotions, Being and Nothingness, some of his major works. And he laid a lot of the philosophical foundation for this gender theory that is sweeping the nation now. And what he did was he took Aristotle. Aristotle is in sync with the Bible on this by saying that your essence for Aristotle, your essence precedes your existence, which is a fancy way of saying there's such a thing as human nature. There's a way that we thrive as humans when we tap into what we were designed to do. We achieve a state Aristotle called eudaimonia, fulfillment. You're doing what you were made to do. Well, for Sartre, he flips Aristotle backwards, and he doesn't believe in a god or higher power or any design. For Sartre, you just exist. So your existence precedes your essence. You're here. There's no point to human existence. So you now get to, through an act of willpower, create your own essence. You can create yourself as I'm a two-spirit essence. I'm a Zer essence. I'm a they, them essence. I'm a furry essence, right? The whole furry movement of people who identify as, I'm 98% cat essence. A lot of that stuff that's trending on TikTok now, people playing with their identities and claiming those as their new essence, that they are the ideological children and grandchildren of JeanPaul Sartre. So a little bit about him, the kind of character he was a notorious womanizer. For him, sex was about the sadistic conquest of another. It was about asserting power. He got hooked on amphetamines. He campaigned, like everybody we've met so far, for pedophilia. He described himself as, quote, gaga. I'm not stupid, but I'm empty. So again, all of these founders, you don't find some happy, liberated man. You find people who are either suicidal, addicts, deeply depressed, and they're the ones now shaping a new generation to follow their dogmas, who are going to end up equally as depressed and broken.
Yeah. Okay. So the last person on this chart is Jacques Derrida. Talk about his views and some of the facts about his life.
Sure. So his main doctrines, he's one of the big inspirations for queer theory. He thought that language itself is oppressive. He says we inhabit a logocentric Western culture where words are used to exclude. So he says that grammatical distinctions between, say, he and she, that's oppressive. Distinctions between man and woman, those words themselves are oppressive. They perpetuate false binaries. He-she language is these are tools of oppression. So we need to subvert all that. We need to, in his words, disorganize the inherited order by, his term was trashing all these binaries. So using they, them, using Zer, these are ways for people who bought into Derrida's ideology. These are ways of dismantling the heteronormative oppressive power structures. So again, I'm just amazed by this stuff, Becket, that Derrida is notoriously hard to read. A lot of his critics give him flack for being so abstruse in his writing. But here you have, like, especially on TikTok, you have, 12 and 13-year-olds who are faithfully regurgitating his doctrines. And a little bit about him, again, he's a sordid character like everybody else that we've met so far. He described himself as a horrible Mediterranean macho man. He was a notorious womanizer like Sartre. His own sons wanted nothing to do with him. They disowned him for all of his infidelities. He often coerced his lovers to have abortions. He used to acknowledge the existence of a love child. I mean, just the list goes on, but these are the big seven who all of what's being mainstreamed now, trace it to its origins, and this is the cast of characters we meet.
Wow. Well, thank you for going through this. I mean, it's, so some people in the current culture may think, this stuff is just coming out of thin air. Like, how is this all happening now? But it's all of, these guys and others whose philosophies and teachings that are, have come home to roost and have really changed an entire society. So
and especially for the parents out there, I've been in recently a meeting where the parents got to meet beforehand the woman who was coming in to do the sex education for the sixth graders. And I just asked point blank in this meeting, I said, what steps have you taken to ensure that the dogmas of Alfred Kinsey and the dogmas of Wilhelm Reich and Foucault and Benjamin, all these forefathers of gender theory, what have you done to ensure that none of their doctrines are going to be passed on to our children? And it really froze her in her tracks. And it gave me sort of a small platform to awaken other parents to the fact that it is these dogmas that are being passed on. So she said, oh, we don't teach any of that controversial stuff. We have one unit on the genderbread person, which she said, it's very innocuous. And I said, all due respect, it's not innocuous. The genderbread person is the direct result of the dogmas of John Money and Harry Benjamin and so forth. And just being the one parent to sort of step up, all these other parents were like, yeah, like people are just sort of, it's easier to be a fly on the wall and not speak up. And so I'd encourage listeners out there, if you got to be the first one, if you got to be the spearhead to sort of break through, you'd be pleasantly surprised to see how many other people are standing right behind you, willing to stand up to this nonsense.
Wow, that's good. Well, thank you, Thaddeus Williams, for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. It's always fun to get together, Becket.
Thank you. All right, guys, we will see you next time on the show.